You think you're strong, but you haven't really been tested yet. And that's not an insult. That's the truth most people avoid. Because strength doesn't show up when life is easy. It shows up when things stop going your way, when pressure builds, when nothing responds the way you expected, when control disappears. And here's where it gets uncomfortable. Most people don't rise in those moments. They react, they avoid. They fall back into patterns they don't even question. And if you're honest, you've done that too. You're watching this right now because something in your life feels heavier than it should. Something feels out of control. And no matter how much you think about it, you're not handling it the way you want to. Not because you're weak, but because you're untrained under pressure. That's the part no one teaches you. You were taught how to succeed, how to plan, how to set goals. But no one taught you how to stay in control when everything starts collapsing. So when life pushes you to the edge, you don't become who you want to be. You become who you've practiced being. And that realization hit me harder than any failure ever could. Because there was a time in my life where everything looked fine on the outside. I was functioning. I was moving forward. Nothing was obviously wrong. But internally, I was unstable. The smallest problem would throw me off. One bad moment could ruin my entire day. A little pressure, and my mind would spiral. Overthinking, doubt, avoidance. And I kept telling myself, I'll handle it when things calm down. I just need a break. I'll be better when life gets easier. But life doesn't wait for you to feel ready. It tests you first, and I remember one moment. No big failure, no dramatic collapse, just pressure, building quietly. Deadlines stacking, expectations rising, things slipping out of control. And for the first time, I couldn't escape it. No distraction worked. No excuse helped. No one stepped in. It was just me and everything I had been avoiding. And that's when I saw it clearly. I wasn't strong. I was just comfortable. I'd never trained my mind, never built emotional control, never stayed in discomfort long enough to grow from it. I'd lived in conditions that protected me, and the moment those conditions disappeared, I collapsed. Not on the outside, on the inside. And that's the most dangerous place to break, because no one sees it. You still show up. You still talk. You still function. But you're not in control anymore. Your emotions are, your habits are, your patterns are. And that's when everything changed for me. Because I realized something most people never understand. Life is not breaking you. It is exposing you. Exposing your habits, your reactions, your lack of discipline under pressure. And if you don't train for that, you will repeat the same patterns again and again and again. So this is not motivation. This is training. Because motivation fades, but identity stays. In the next 60 minutes, you're going to learn why you lose control under pressure, the exact moment you give your power away, and how to become someone who stays calm, focused, and in control, even when life pushes you to the edge. Not by hoping life gets easier, but by becoming someone who can handle hard life. Because when that moment comes, and it will come, you won't rise to your intentions. You will fall to your identity. So the real question is not, can you handle it? The real question is, who are you becoming before it happens? Stay with this, because what you're about to understand might not make your life easier, but it will make you someone who doesn't break anymore. Chapter 1. The moment you realize no one is coming. There's a moment in life that quietly changes everything. Not all at once. Not in a dramatic way, but in a way you can't unsee. It's the moment you realize no one is coming. No one is going to step in and fix your life. No one is going to carry the weight you've been avoiding. No one is going to suddenly make things easier for you. Matres, and if you're honest, a part of you is still waiting for clarity, waiting to feel ready, waiting for the right moment. But here's the truth. Most people never say out loud, you're not waiting for the right moment. You're avoiding the responsibility of acting. And you know it. You can feel it. Every time you hesitate, every time you delay, every time you tell yourself, I'll deal with it later. That tension you feel, that's not confusion. That's awareness. I remember exactly when it hit me. I was sitting alone, staring at my phone, scrolling, refreshing, checking for something that never came. A message, a sign, anything. Not because I needed help solving the problem, but because I didn't want to face it alone. And the silence was louder than anything I could have heard. Because in that moment, I saw it clearly. I was waiting, not for solutions, for comfort, for someone to step in and make it easier, so I wouldn't have to change. And that realization was uncomfortable, because it forced me to face something I had been avoiding for a long time. This is my responsibility, not my situation, not my circumstances. Me. And here's where most people break. They hear that, and they feel overwhelmed. They think responsibility means pressure. But it doesn't. Responsibility is not pressure. It's power. Because the moment you take responsibility, you stop waiting. And the moment you stop waiting, you start moving. Most people never reach this point. Or worse, they reach it and ignore it. They distract themselves. They go back to comfort. They convince themselves things aren't that bad. But deep down, they know. They know they're avoiding something. They know they're capable of more. They know they're not fully in control. And that creates something dangerous. A quiet tension. You feel it when you wake up. You feel it when you hesitate. You feel it when you choose comfort instead of action. And over time, that tension turns into regret. Not loud regret, not dramatic regret. The quiet kind, the kind that builds slowly. From all the moments you didn't act, all the decisions you delayed, all the times you knew what you needed to do and didn't do it. So let me ask you something directly. What are you avoiding right now? Not in general. Specifically, what is the one thing you know you should face, but keep pushing away? Because that's where your growth is. And until you face it, nothing changes. Not your life, not your mindset, not your identity. You stay the same. And that's the real danger, not failure. Stagnation, because failure can teach you something, but stagnation, it just keeps you stuck in the same loop, again and again and again, until years pass, and nothing has really changed. That's why this moment matters. The moment you realize no one is coming, because it forces a decision. You either keep waiting, or you step into control. And control doesn't mean having everything figured out. It means taking action before you feel ready. It means moving, even when it's uncomfortable. It means doing the thing you've been avoiding. Not perfectly, not confidently, but deliberately. Because action creates something most people are missing. Clarity. Not thinking, not planning, not waiting. Action. So start small. Do the thing you've been delaying. Make the decision you've been avoiding. Take one step, just one. And something shifts. Not in your life immediately, but in you. Because now, you're no longer waiting. You're participating. And that changes everything. Because the person who waits and the person who acts are not the same person. One hopes life will change. The other forces it to. And over time, those small actions build something powerful. Not confidence, certainty, the quiet kind, the kind that comes from knowing, I can handle this. Not because it's easy, but because you don't run anymore. And that's where real strength begins, not in big moments, not in dramatic change, but in the decision to stop waiting, because the truth is simple and hard. No one is coming. And the moment you truly accept that is the moment you become dangerous. Chapter 2. You don't break. You default. Most people think they break under pressure. They say things like, I couldn't handle it. I wasn't strong enough. I just fell apart. But that's not what actually happens. You don't break. You default. You fall back to the version of yourself you've been practicing every day without realizing it. And that's what makes this uncomfortable, because it means that moment you lost control. It wasn't random, it was predictable. I didn't understand this at first. I thought pressure was the problem. I thought stress was what made me react the way I did. But when I started paying attention, I noticed something. Every time I felt overwhelmed, I responded the same way. I avoided, I delayed, I distracted myself. Different situations, same reaction. And that's when it hit me. This isn't pressure. This is pattern, because pressure doesn't create your behavior. It reveals it. It exposes what's already there. Your habits, your emotional reactions, your level of discipline. And if you don't like what shows up under pressure, it's not because life is unfair. It's because you haven't trained for that moment. Think about it like this. If you drop someone into chaos, they won't suddenly become calm, focused, and disciplined. They will become more of who they already are. Faster, more intense, less filtered. And that's exactly what happens when life pushes you to the edge. You don't rise to your expectations, you fall to your conditioning. So let me ask you something directly. What do you do when things get hard? Not what you want to do, not what you say you'll do. What do you actually do? Do you focus or do you avoid? Do you act or do you overthink? Do you stay calm or do you react emotionally? Because whatever your answer is, that's your default. And your default is your real identity under pressure. Not your goals, not your intentions, not your plans, your habits. That's why so many people feel stuck. They set goals, they get motivated, they plan everything out. But when pressure hits, they go right back to the same patterns. And then they think something is wrong with them. But nothing is wrong. They're just untrained. Because you don't build strength in easy moments. You build it in repetition, in what you do, daily, consistently, quietly. That's what creates your default. And your default is what shows up when life gets hard. So if you want to change how you respond under pressure, you don't start in the moment of pressure. You start before it, in small, controlled situations. When things are calm, when things are manageable, that's where the training happens. Because if you can't control yourself in small moments, you won't control yourself in big ones. So here's what you do. You start observing, not judging, observing. Pay attention to your patterns. When something stresses you, what do you do first? Do you reach for distraction? Do you delay action? Do you create excuses? Write it down. Be honest. Because clarity is the first step. Then, you interrupt it. Not perfectly, not every time, but intentionally. You catch the moment, right before you default, and you choose something different. Even if it's small, even if it feels uncomfortable, even if it doesn't feel natural. Because it won't feel natural, not yet. You're replacing a pattern. And that takes time, but every time you interrupt that default, you weaken it. And every time you choose a new response, you strengthen a new identity. This is how change actually happens. Not through motivation, through repetition, through awareness, through small decisions made consistently, and over time, something shifts. The same situations that used to overwhelm you start to feel different. Not because life got easier, but because you changed. Your default changed. And that's when you realize something powerful. You were never breaking. You were just repeating. Repeating patterns you never questioned. Repeating habits you never trained out of. Repeating reactions that felt automatic, but were actually learned. And if they were learned, they can be changed. That's the part most people miss. They think their reactions are who they are. They think their patterns define them. But they don't. They reflect what you've practiced. And anything you've practiced, you can replace. So the next time life gets hard, don't ask, "Why is this happening to me?" Ask, "What is this revealing about me?" Because that question changes everything. It turns pressure into feedback. It turns stress into awareness. It turns breakdown into training. And once you start seeing it that way, you stop fearing pressure. You start using it, because now you understand. You don't break under pressure. You reveal what you've trained. And if you don't like what you see, that's not the end. That's the starting point. Chapter 3. The 3-second gap that changes everything. Most people don't lose control all at once. They lose it in seconds. A reaction that happens too fast. A word said without thinking. A decision made in emotion instead of awareness. And by the time they realize it, it's already done. The damage is already there. A relationship strained. An opportunity lost. A moment they wish they could take back. Not because they didn't know better, but because they didn't pause. I used to think control meant discipline, forcing yourself to act a certain way, suppressing emotions, trying to stay strong no matter what. But that never worked for long, because pressure doesn't disappear, it builds. And eventually, it breaks through. Not in big ways, in small, subtle moments. And those small moments shape everything. I remember one specific situation. I was already stressed, deadlines, expectations, things piling up. My mind was already tense, and then something small happened. A message, a comment, something insignificant. But in that state, it didn't feel small. It felt like pressure on top of pressure, and I reacted. Immediately. No pause, no awareness, just reaction. And the moment I sent that message, I knew. I knew I'd just made things worse. Not because of the situation, but because of how I handled it. That's when I started to notice something. It wasn't the situation that caused the problem. It was the speed of my response, the lack of space between what happened and what I did next. Because in that space is where your power lives. And most people never use it. They go straight from stimulus to reaction. No gap, no awareness, no control. Just habit. And that's why they feel like they're not in control of their own life. Because they're not. Their reactions are, their patterns are, their emotions are. But here's the shift that changed everything for me. You don't need more control. You need more space. Space between what happens and how you respond. Because when you create that space, you give yourself a choice. And choice is power. Without that space, you're automatic. With it, you're intentional. So how do you build that? Not through willpower, not through motivation, through practice. Simple, repeatable practice. The kind that feels small, but changes everything over time. It starts with something most people ignore. Awareness. You have to catch the moment. Not after. Not when it's too late. In the moment. When you feel the emotion rising. When you feel the tension building. When you feel the urge to react. That's the moment. And in that moment, you do something different. You pause. Not for long, not dramatically, just 3 seconds. That's it. 3 seconds of doing nothing. 3 seconds of not reacting. 3 seconds of interrupting your pattern. And it sounds simple, almost too simple. But it's not easy, because your mind doesn't want to pause. It wants to react. It wants to release the tension immediately. It wants to say something, do something, fix something. But when you pause, you take control back. And in those 3 seconds, something powerful happens. You separate yourself from the reaction. You stop being inside the emotion and start observing it. You notice, I'm getting frustrated. I'm feeling pressure. I want to react right now. And that awareness changes everything, because now you're not the reaction anymore. You're the one choosing. And once you have that choice, you can ask a better question. Is this worth my energy? Not, is this right? Not, should I respond? But, is this worth it? Because most of the time, it's not. Most reactions are unnecessary. They don't solve the problem. They just release emotion. And often, they create bigger problems. But when you pause, you see that. You see the bigger picture. You see the consequences. You see the version of yourself you're about to become if you follow that reaction. And in that moment, you can choose differently. Not perfectly. Not every time, but more than before. And that's enough. Because control is not about never reacting. It's about reacting less and responding more. Over time, those small pauses start to build something, not just control. Clarity. You start seeing patterns you never noticed. Situations that trigger you. People that affect your emotions. Moments where you lose yourself. And once you see them, you can prepare for them. You can expect them. And when they happen, you're not surprised anymore. You're ready. And that changes everything. Because now, life doesn't catch you off guard the same way. You don't get pulled into every emotional moment. You don't react to every situation. You choose. And that choice becomes your identity. The person who pauses. The person who thinks. The person who stays in control. Even when things get intense. And that's rare. Most people don't have that. They live in reaction mode, constantly responding to everything around them. And that drains them, emotionally, mentally, physically. Because reacting takes energy. Control saves it. And the more you practice this, the more you realize something important. You don't need to control everything. You just need to control yourself. Not your thoughts, not your emotions, your response. Because thoughts will come, emotions will rise, situations will happen. That's not in your control. But what you do next always is, even if it doesn't feel like it, even if it feels automatic. There is always a moment, however small, where you can choose. And that moment is where your life is shaped. Not in big decisions, not in major events. In small, repeated responses. That's where your identity is built. That's where your strength is formed. That's where your future is decided. So the next time you feel that impulse, that urge to react, don't fight it. Don't suppress it. Pause. Just 3 seconds. And ask yourself, is this who I want to be right now? Because every reaction is a vote. A vote for the person you're becoming. And if you keep reacting the same way, you keep becoming the same person. But if you start choosing differently, even in small moments, you start becoming someone new, someone more controlled, more aware, more powerful. Not because life changed, but because you did. And it all starts with 3 seconds. 3 seconds most people ignore. 3 seconds that change everything, because in those 3 seconds, you stop living on autopilot and you start living on purpose. Chapter 4. Discomfort is not the problem. You are avoiding it. Let's be honest for a moment. You already know what you need to do. You've known it for a while. That conversation you keep delaying. That decision you keep pushing back. That habit you keep telling yourself you'll fix soon. It's not a mystery. It's not confusion. It's avoidance. And the uncomfortable truth is this. Your life is not stuck. You are choosing comfort over growth. Not once. Not occasionally. Daily. In small, invisible decisions that feel harmless in the moment, but slowly shape who you become. I didn't realize how much I was avoiding until I started paying attention. I thought I was being careful. I thought I was being strategic. I thought I was waiting for the right time. But when I looked closer, I saw a pattern. Every time something felt uncomfortable, I moved away from it. Not dramatically, subtly. I would delay it, distract myself, find something else to focus on, something easier, something familiar, something that didn't challenge me. And in the moment, it felt good. Relief. Temporary relief. But over time, that relief came with a cost. Because every time I avoided discomfort, I reinforced something dangerous, that I couldn't handle it, that I needed to escape it. That discomfort was something to fear. And the more I did that, the smaller my world became. Fewer risks, fewer opportunities, fewer moments of growth. Everything started to revolve around one thing: staying comfortable. And comfort feels safe, but it comes with a hidden price. It keeps you exactly where you are, because nothing grows in comfort. Not your discipline, not your confidence, not your identity. All of that is built in discomfort. In moments where you don't feel ready, where things feel uncertain, where you'd rather do anything else than face what's in front of you. That's where change happens. Not when it's easy, but when it's hard. The problem is, most people misunderstand discomfort. They think discomfort means something is wrong, that they're not ready, that it's not the right time, that they should wait until it feels better. But discomfort is not a signal to stop. It's a signal that you're at the edge of growth. And if you keep stepping away from that edge, you stay the same. I had to learn this the hard way. There were things I kept avoiding for months. Important things. Conversations that needed to happen. Decisions that needed to be made. Actions that would move my life forward. And every time I thought about them, I felt resistance. That internal tension. That voice saying, "Not now. Later. You're not ready yet." And I listened to it, again and again. Until one day, I realized something uncomfortable. The voice wasn't protecting me. It was limiting me. It wasn't trying to help. It was trying to keep me safe, at the cost of my growth. And that's when everything shifted. I stopped asking, "How do I feel about this?" And I started asking, "What does this require from me?" Because how you feel will lie to you. It will always push you toward comfort, toward ease, toward what's familiar. But what your life requires is different. It requires action, discipline, discomfort. And once you start seeing that clearly, you stop negotiating with yourself. You stop asking for permission. You stop waiting to feel ready. You just act, not because it feels good, but because it's necessary. And that's where real change begins. Not in motivation, in decision. The decision to do what's uncomfortable, on purpose. Every day. Not in big dramatic ways, but in small, consistent ones. One hard conversation, one task you've been avoiding, one decision you've been delaying. You face it. You don't overthink it. You don't wait for the perfect moment. You just step into it. And at first, it feels uncomfortable. Of course it does. You're going against your pattern. You're breaking a habit. You're stepping into something your mind has been trained to avoid. But if you stay there, if you don't run, something interesting happens. The discomfort changes. It doesn't disappear, but it becomes manageable, familiar, less threatening. And that's when you realize something powerful. You were never incapable of handling discomfort. You were just avoiding it. And avoidance makes everything feel bigger than it is, scarier than it is, more overwhelming than it actually is. But when you face it, it shrinks. It becomes something you can deal with, something you can move through. And every time you do that, you build something, not confidence, trust. Trust in yourself, the kind that comes from knowing, I don't run anymore. I face things. I handle what needs to be handled. And that changes how you see yourself. You're no longer the person who avoids. You're the person who steps in, even when it's uncomfortable, especially when it's uncomfortable. And that identity is powerful because it carries into everything: work, relationships, decisions, challenges. You stop hesitating as much. You stop overthinking as much. You stop delaying as much because you've trained yourself to move toward discomfort, not away from it. And that's rare. Most people spend their lives doing the opposite, avoiding what's hard, chasing what's easy, and wondering why nothing changes. But you understand something they don't. Discomfort is not the problem. Avoidance is, because discomfort is temporary. It passes, it fades, but avoidance stays. It builds, it compounds, until it becomes your identity. The person who delays, the person who hesitates, the person who never quite steps into their full potential. And that's the real cost, not the discomfort itself, but who you become by avoiding it. So let me ask you again, what are you avoiding right now? What is the one thing you know would move your life forward, but you keep pushing away? Because that's where your next level is. Not in more thinking, not in more planning, in action, uncomfortable action. And you don't need to change everything today. You just need to change one decision, right now. Instead of avoiding, step in. Instead of delaying, act. Instead of choosing comfort, choose growth. Even if it's small, even if it's imperfect, because that's how it starts. And over time, those small decisions create a pattern, a new default, a new identity. The person who does hard things, the person who doesn't wait, the person who moves forward, regardless of how they feel. And once you become that person, your life changes. Not because things get easier, but because you stop avoiding what's hard. And when you stop avoiding, you start evolving. That's the difference. That's the shift. That's the edge. And most people never cross it. Not because they can't, but because they won't. They stay where it's comfortable, where it's predictable, where it's safe. But safe doesn't grow you. Discomfort does. And if you're willing to step into it, consistently, deliberately, without waiting to feel ready, you become someone most people never become. Someone who can handle hard things. Someone who moves forward anyway. Someone who doesn't need life to be easy, to be strong. And that's where everything changes. Not outside, inside. Because the moment you stop avoiding discomfort is the moment you stop avoiding your potential. Chapter 5. Small discipline builds unbreakable identity. Most people think change happens in big moments. A breakthrough, a turning point, a single decision that changes everything. But that's not how it works. Real change is quieter than that. It doesn't happen in one moment. It happens in small decisions, repeated daily. And most people ignore those decisions because they don't feel important. Skipping one task doesn't seem like a big deal. Delaying something for later feels harmless. Breaking a promise to yourself once feels insignificant. But those moments are not small. They are signals, signals that shape your identity. Because every time you do something, you reinforce a version of yourself. And every time you don't, you reinforce a different one. I didn't understand this at first. I thought discipline was about big actions, waking up early, working harder, pushing myself beyond my limits. And I tried that. For a few days, maybe a week. Then I burned out, fell back into old habits, and told myself, I just need more motivation. But motivation was never the problem. The problem was inconsistency. I was trying to change my life without changing my daily behavior. And your life doesn't change until your patterns do. That's when I shifted my focus, not to big goals, but to small promises, simple things, things that felt almost too easy to matter. Finish what I start. Do one task without distraction. Keep one promise to myself every day. That was it. No pressure to be perfect. No unrealistic expectations. Just one decision done consistently. And at first, it didn't feel like much. There was no big result, no immediate transformation, just small actions, quiet effort. But something was happening beneath the surface. Every time I followed through, I was proving something to myself. I can do what I say, and that matters more than people realize. Because most people don't trust themselves. They set goals and don't follow through. They make plans and don't execute. They promise change and repeat the same patterns, and over time, that creates doubt. Not loud doubt, subtle doubt. The kind that says, you probably won't stick with this. You've tried before. You'll fall back again. And that doubt kills momentum before it even starts. That's why small discipline is so powerful, because it rebuilds trust, not in theory, in reality. You say you'll do something, and you do it. Again, and again, and again. And slowly, that voice changes, from doubt to certainty. I do what I say. I follow through. I don't quit on myself. And that identity is unbreakable. Not because you're perfect, but because you're consistent. Consistency is what most people are missing. They wait for intensity, for motivation, for energy, for the right mood. But those things come and go. Consistency stays, and it's built through small discipline, not big effort, small, repeated action. That's what shapes who you become. Because your identity is not built on what you intend to do. It's built on what you actually do. Daily, quietly, without attention. So if you want to become stronger under pressure, you don't wait for pressure. You train in small moments, when things are easy, when things are calm, when it doesn't feel necessary. That's when it matters most, because that's when you build your default, the version of you that shows up when things get hard. So here's the shift. Stop asking, what can I achieve today? Start asking, what can I complete? Completion builds discipline. Completion builds momentum. Completion builds identity, even if it's small, especially if it's small, because small wins stack, and over time, they become something bigger. You start noticing changes. You follow through more often. You hesitate less. You trust yourself more, and that trust is what carries you through hard moments. Because when pressure hits, you don't rely on motivation. You rely on who you've trained yourself to be. The person who shows up, the person who finishes, the person who doesn't break their own word. And that's rare. Most people break promises to themselves constantly. And then they wonder why they feel stuck, why they feel uncertain, why they don't believe in their own ability. But it's not complicated. If you don't trust yourself, you won't move forward with confidence. And if you don't build that trust, nothing changes. So start small. Pick one thing, one action, one promise, and keep it, no matter what. Not when it's convenient. Not when it feels good. Always. Because that's how identity is built, not in big declarations. In small, consistent proof. And here's the part most people miss. You don't need to do more. You need to follow through more. That's the difference. Because doing more without consistency creates burnout. Following through creates strength. And strength is what you need when life gets hard. Because hard moments don't require perfection. They require stability, the ability to stay grounded, to stay consistent, to stay in control. And that comes from training, daily training, small discipline, repeated over time, until it becomes automatic, until it becomes who you are. And when you reach that point, you don't need to push yourself as much. You don't need to force motivation. You don't need to rely on willpower, because you've built something stronger than all of that. Identity. The identity of someone who does what needs to be done, regardless of how they feel, regardless of the situation, regardless of the pressure. And once you become that person, your life changes. Not because things get easier, but because you become reliable to yourself. And that's the foundation of everything, because when you trust yourself, you move differently. You decide faster, you act more, you hesitate less. And over time, those small decisions create a completely different life. Not overnight, but inevitably, because small discipline builds unbreakable identity. And once your identity is strong, life can push you to the edge. And you won't collapse. You'll respond, you'll adapt, you'll move forward. Because you've already trained for that moment in the smallest decisions no one else ever saw. Chapter 6. Your mind is lying to you under pressure. When things get hard, your mind changes. Not in an obvious way, not in a way you immediately notice, but subtly, quietly. And if you're not paying attention, it starts working against you, the same mind that helps you plan, focus, solve problems, becomes the thing that holds you back. Not because it's broken, but because it's trying to protect you. I didn't understand this for a long time. I thought my thoughts were truth. If I felt overwhelmed, it meant the situation was too much. If I thought I can't handle this, it meant I actually couldn't. If I felt doubt, it meant I wasn't ready. So I listened. And every time I listened, I stepped back. I avoided. I delayed. I hesitated. And it felt justified, because it wasn't random. It was coming from my own mind. But that's exactly the problem. Your mind doesn't always tell you what's true. It tells you what's safe. And under pressure, safe becomes the priority. Not growth, not progress, not long-term outcomes, just immediate relief. So your mind starts generating thoughts like, this is too much. You're not ready. You might fail. What if it goes wrong? And those thoughts feel real, convincing, logical, but they're not truth. They're patterns. Patterns designed to keep you inside your comfort zone. Because your brain doesn't care about your potential. It cares about your survival. And survival prefers familiar overgrowth, even if familiar keeps you stuck. That's why the same thoughts show up every time things get hard. Not new thoughts, the same ones. Repeated, refined, reinforced over time. And if you never question them, they become your identity. I'm not good under pressure. I always overthink. I can't handle stress. But those are not facts. They are conclusions, built from repeated patterns. And anything built can be changed. That's the shift. You stop believing every thought, and you start observing them, not reacting, not suppressing, observing. I remember the first time I did this consciously. I was in a stressful situation again, the same kind that used to trigger me, and the thoughts started, "This is too much. You're going to mess this up. You can't handle this right now." But instead of reacting, I paused, and I asked myself something different. Is this actually true? Or is this just my pattern? That question changed everything, because for the first time, I created distance. Distance between me and my thoughts. I stopped being inside them and started looking at them. And when you do that, something interesting happens. They lose power because you realize, just because you think something doesn't mean it's real. It just means it's familiar. And familiarity is dangerous because it feels like truth, even when it's not. So instead of believing the thought, you challenge it. Not aggressively, calmly. You replace "I can't handle this" with "I haven't handled this yet." You replace "This is too much" with "This is uncomfortable, but manageable." You replace "I'm not ready" with "I'll figure it out as I go." And at first, it feels unnatural, almost fake. Because you've been repeating the old thoughts for so long, they feel like you, but they're not you. They're patterns, and patterns can be rewritten, not instantly, not perfectly, but consistently. Every time the old thought appears, you interrupt it, you question it, you replace it again and again and again. And slowly, your internal dialogue starts to change. Not dramatically, but noticeably. You react less emotionally. You think more clearly. You feel more in control. And that control comes from awareness, not from eliminating negative thoughts. That's impossible. They will always show up, but you don't have to follow them. You don't have to believe them. You don't have to act on them. That's the difference. Most people live inside their thoughts. They follow them automatically. They let them dictate behavior. But when you step back, you take control. And control doesn't mean silence. It means choice. The ability to choose which thoughts you engage with and which ones you let pass. Like background noise. Because not every thought deserves your attention, and definitely not every thought deserves your action. So the next time you feel overwhelmed, pay attention to what your mind is saying, not just the situation, the narrative, the story you're telling yourself about it. Because that story is shaping your reaction. And if you don't question it, it will control you. But if you do, you change everything. You turn pressure into awareness. You turn fear into information. You turn doubt into something you can work with, instead of something that stops you. And over time, that becomes your new default. Not believing everything you think, not reacting to every emotion, not letting your mind run unchecked, but staying present, aware, in control. And that's powerful. Because when your mind stops controlling you, you stop limiting yourself. You stop holding back. You stop overthinking every move. You stop hesitating as much, because now you see the thoughts for what they are. Not commands, suggestions. And you decide what to do next. That's what mental strength actually looks like. Not being fearless, not being perfect, but being aware. And choosing anyway. Because at the end of the day, your mind will always try to protect you. But growth doesn't happen in protection. It happens in expansion. In stepping beyond what feels safe. In doing things, even when your mind says not to. And the more you practice that, the quieter those limiting thoughts become. Not because they disappear, but because they stop controlling you. And that's when everything shifts. Because now, when life gets hard, you don't just react. You observe. You choose. You move forward anyway. Not because your mind is silent, but because you're no longer listening to the wrong voice. Chapter 7. Stop trying to control life. Control yourself. Most people are exhausted for a reason. Not because life is too hard, but because they're trying to control things they were never meant to control. Outcomes, other people, timing, results. They want certainty. They want things to go exactly as planned. They want guarantees. And when they don't get that, they feel anxious, frustrated, overwhelmed, like life is working against them. I used to live like that, constantly thinking about outcomes. What if it doesn't work? What if I fail? What if things go wrong? And the more I thought about it, the heavier everything felt, because I was trying to solve problems that didn't exist yet. Trying to control results that weren't mine to control. And it drained me, mentally, emotionally, because no matter how much you think, you can't control everything. You can't control how people respond. You can't control what happens next. You can't control every outcome, and the more you try, the more powerless you feel, because you keep focusing on things you have no influence over. That's where most people break. Not under pressure, under uncertainty. Because uncertainty creates anxiety, and anxiety makes you try to control more, which creates more stress, which makes you feel even less in control. It becomes a loop, a draining, endless loop, until you realize something that changes everything. You don't need to control life. You need to control yourself. That's it. That's the shift. Because while life is unpredictable, your response doesn't have to be. And that's where your power is. Not in what happens, in how you handle what happens. That's the only thing that's truly yours. Your effort, your focus, your reaction, your discipline. Everything else, uncertain. And once you accept that, something interesting happens. You stop fighting reality. You stop resisting uncertainty. You stop trying to predict everything, and instead, you focus on what you can actually do. Right now, in this moment. I remember when this finally clicked for me. I was dealing with a situation I couldn't control. No matter how much I thought about it, no matter how much I planned, I couldn't change the outcome. And it was frustrating, because I wanted certainty, I wanted control, but I didn't have it. And eventually, I got tired of fighting that. So I asked a different question. Not, how do I fix this? But, what is actually in my control right now? And the answer was simple. My effort, my attitude, my next action. That was it. And for the first time, I felt lighter. Because I stopped carrying things that weren't mine. I stopped trying to control the uncontrollable, and I focused on what I could actually influence. And that changed everything. Not the situation. Me. I became calmer, clearer, more focused. Because my energy wasn't scattered anymore. It was directed. And that's the difference. Most people scatter their energy, trying to control everything. But when you focus it on what actually matters, you become effective. You move forward, even in uncertainty, even in pressure, even when things don't go your way. Because you're not waiting for the perfect outcome. You're executing the next step. And that's what builds momentum. Not certainty, action. So here's the shift you need to make. Stop asking, what will happen? Start asking, what can I do right now? Because the first question creates anxiety. The second creates progress. And progress is what you need. Not perfection, not guarantees. Movement, even small movement. Because movement creates clarity. And clarity reduces anxiety. It's a cycle, but a productive one. You act, you learn, you adjust, you act again. And over time, you realize something powerful. You don't need to know everything. You just need to keep moving. And that's where most people get stuck. They wait for clarity before action. But clarity comes from action, not the other way around. So they stay still, overthinking, analyzing, delaying, and calling it preparation. But it's not preparation, it's avoidance. Because real preparation includes action, even imperfect action, especially imperfect action, because that's how you learn. That's how you adapt. That's how you grow. And when you combine that with control over yourself, you become dangerous in the best way. Because now, life doesn't shake you the same way. Things go wrong, you adjust. Plans change, you adapt. Outcomes don't match expectations. You keep moving, not emotionally, not reactively, but intentionally. Because you understand something most people don't. Life is not supposed to be controlled. It's supposed to be navigated. And navigation requires flexibility, awareness, adjustment, action, not rigid control, not perfect planning. And when you shift into that mindset, you stop fearing uncertainty. You start using it. Because now, uncertainty is no longer something that stops you. It's something you move through. And that's where real confidence comes from. Not from knowing everything will work out, but from knowing you'll handle it if it doesn't. That's the difference. That's what makes you stable under pressure. And towards not control over life, control over yourself, your reactions, your focus, your discipline. Because those are the only things that matter and the only things that last. Everything else changes. Everything else is unpredictable. But you can remain steady, and that steadiness is power. Quiet power, the kind that doesn't panic, the kind that doesn't break, the kind that doesn't need everything to be perfect to keep moving forward. And once you have that, life can throw anything at you, and you'll still move. Not because it's easy, but because you've stopped trying to control what isn't yours and started mastering what is. Chapter 8. You are being forged, not destroyed. There's a moment in every difficult season where it feels like everything is falling apart. Not just outside, inside. Your plans stop working, your confidence starts shaking, your usual ways of coping don't hold anymore. And it doesn't feel like growth. It feels like loss, like something is breaking. And most people interpret that moment the wrong way. They think, this is too much. This isn't supposed to happen. Something is going wrong. But what if it's not? What if nothing is going wrong? What if this is exactly what needed to happen? I didn't understand this when I was in it. When things started getting harder, I assumed I was losing control, that I was going backward, that I was somehow failing because everything felt unstable, uncomfortable, unfamiliar, and I wanted it to stop. I wanted things to go back to how they were, predictable, controlled, easy. But that version of my life was also the version where I wasn't growing, where I wasn't being challenged, where I stayed the same, and I didn't realize it then. But what felt like everything falling apart was actually everything being rebuilt. Because growth doesn't feel like progress. It feels like pressure. It feels like confusion, like discomfort, like resistance. Because something inside you is changing. And change is not smooth. It's not clean. It's not comfortable. It's messy. It stretches you. It challenges you. It forces you to let go of who you were before you're fully ready to become someone new. And that space between who you were and who you're becoming is where most people quit. Because it's uncomfortable. Because it's unclear. Because it doesn't feel like improvement. It feels like uncertainty. And uncertainty is hard to sit with. So people escape it. They go back to old habits, old environments, old versions of themselves. Not because it's better, but because it's familiar, because it feels safe, even if it keeps them stuck. But if you stay in that moment, if you don't run, if you allow the discomfort to exist without escaping it, something shifts. You start to see things differently. You realize you're not falling apart, you're being reshaped. Every challenge you're facing is demanding something from you. More patience, more discipline, more awareness, more control. And if you meet that demand, you grow, not instantly, but inevitably. Because pressure creates adaptation. That's how everything evolves. And you are no different. The problem is, most people resist that pressure. They fight it. They complain about it. They try to escape it. And by doing that, they stay the same. Because without pressure, there is no transformation. Think about it. Every strong version of you was built in a moment that felt difficult. A time where you had to adjust, where you had to step up, where you had to become more than you were before. And at the time, it probably didn't feel like growth. It felt like stress. But looking back, you see it differently. You see that it changed you, that it made you stronger, more capable, more aware. And what you're going through now is no different. It just feels different because you're in it. You're in the middle of the process, and the middle is always uncomfortable. There's no clarity, no guarantee, no clear result yet. Just pressure, just uncertainty, just effort. But that's where the work is happening. That's where you're being shaped. So instead of asking, why is this happening to me? Ask, what is this shaping me into? Because that question changes everything. It shifts you from victim to participant, from resistance to acceptance, from confusion to purpose. Now you're not just going through something, you're growing through it, and that mindset is powerful because it keeps you moving, even when it's hard, even when it's unclear, even when nothing feels like it's working. You stay in it, you keep showing up, you keep doing the work, not because it feels good, but because you understand something deeper. This is the process. This is what it looks like. Not clean, not easy, not comfortable, but real. And the longer you stay in it, the more you adapt, the more you change, the more you become someone who can handle more. And that's the goal. Not an easier life, a stronger self. Because life will always have pressure, challenges, uncertainty, unexpected moments. That doesn't go away, but you can change how you respond to it. You can become someone who doesn't collapse, someone who doesn't avoid, someone who doesn't run, but stands, adjusts, moves forward anyway. And that version of you is being built right now, not later, not when things get easier. Now, in the middle of the discomfort, in the middle of the pressure, in the middle of the uncertainty, that's where you're being forged. Not destroyed, forged. And forging is not gentle. It requires heat, pressure, time. But the result is something stronger, something more resilient, something more capable. And that's what you're becoming. If you don't quit, if you don't run, if you don't go back to comfort, because once you push through this phase, once you stay long enough to adapt, you'll look back and realize, this didn't break me, it built me. And that realization changes how you see everything. You stop fearing hard moments. You stop resisting pressure. You stop questioning every challenge, because now you understand this is part of it. This is how you grow. This is how you become. So the next time life feels heavy, don't assume you're falling apart. Remind yourself you're being rebuilt. And if you stay in it, if you keep moving, if you keep choosing growth over comfort, you won't come out the same. You'll come out stronger, clearer, more in control, not because life changed, but because you did. And that's what matters. Because at the edge of your life, when things are uncertain, when pressure is high, when everything feels like it could break, you won't need things to be easy. You'll just need to be ready. And by staying in the process, you're becoming exactly that.